Okay, so we're going to take our analysis of a probability distribution one step further. And this time we're not only going to look at the expected value, which we looked at in the previous example, but we're also going to take into account the standard deviation of the probability distribution. So here we've got, we're asked to compare a $10,000 investment in two funds. And it says, which investment would you recommend and why? So we have here on Fund C on our table here, we see that we have a 30% chance of a $1,000 profit in Fund C. We have a 40% chance of a $500 profit, a 20% chance of a $100 loss, and a 10% chance of a $300 loss. And then we're going to look at Fund D, and Fund D with the same $10,000 investment, we got a 40% chance of a $1,000 profit, a 30% chance of a $600 profit, a 15% chance of a $100 profit, and a 15% chance of a $200 loss. Now we're going to go over to the next screen, and we're going to calculate both the expected value and the standard deviation using a TI calculator. But before we go, let's see. Let's keep in mind that the expected value of a discrete random probability is equal to expected value of a discrete random variable, I should say. I think I said that incorrectly. Is equal to the sum of, let's see, that should be a bracket, the random probability, the random variable times the probability distribution of that variable. So let's move over here to the next screen. Okay, so first we're going to take a look at, we're going to calculate the expected value and the standard deviation coming from that first Fund C. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned, and you may want to get in your book, this is on page 746. This is the guided practice in example 5. That's on page 746, the guided practice in example 5. And so I'm going to go to Stat, and I'm going to edit the list. I'm going to hit Enter here. Now, in this case, I've gone ahead and entered the data for Fund C, which had a 30% chance of a $1,000 profit. And I put the I put the profit in L1, and I put the probability distribution in list 2. So there's a 30% chance of a $1,000 profit. There's a 40% chance of a $500 profit, a 20% chance of a $100 loss, and a 10% chance of a $300 loss. Now I'm going to go here and then click Stat. I'm going to go to Calc, and I'm going to choose the one variable statistics, which is option 1. And you see right here in my list, I've got L1, and then in my frequency list, this is my probability distribution, or L2. And so then I'm just going to hit Enter, Enter, Calculate. Now, right here, this is where I've got the, this is the mean. It was $450. And right here, the sigma of my discrete random variable is 456.6. Now we need to note that, jot that down somewhere. So my expected value is 450, and my standard deviation is 456.6 for Fund C. Now let's go in and let's calculate this for Fund D. So I'm going to hit Stat. I'm going to get back to my list. Now I'm going to have to go in here and enter my data for Fund D. So I'm going to clear out my list. And I'm going over here and I'm going to clear out my list for L1. Okay, now, so let's enter our data. So we were told that there was a 40% chance for a $1,000 profit. So I'm going to enter my $1,000 profit. And there was a 30% chance for my $600 profit. So I'm going to stick with my profit in L1, 600. 15% chance of a $100 profit. And then lastly, I've got a 15% chance of a $200 loss. So I got the $200 loss here and hit enter. Now let's go in here and enter our probability distributions. For the $1,000 loss, I had a 40% chance of a profit. So that 40, turn that to from a percentage to a decimal, that's 0.4. I've got a 30% chance of a $600 profit, so that's 0.3 for the 30% chance. At a $100 profit, I had a 15% chance of a $100 profit, 0.15. And for the $200 loss, that was also a 15% chance or 15% probability, so 0.15 and enter. All right, so we got our data entered. I'm going back over here to stat. I'm going to calc. I'm going to go in here with my one variable statistics. I still got my list 1 in my list mode and frequency list. I've got the L2. I'm going to hit enter, enter, calculate. And let's see what we got here. We've got our mean, our expected value is 565, and our standard deviation is 443.0. Okay, so that gets all of our calculations done. And now we'll move over here. We're going to do a little bit of analysis and determine which fund we want to choose from. All right, so now one of the things when I'm looking at financial data, which is what we worked on here, because we were looking at different mutual funds, one of the things that standard deviation tells us is it's a measure of risk because it is a measure of the variance of the possible data. Now, I went ahead and I've entered here on this slide what we found when we calculated both the expected value and the standard deviations of both Fund C and D. And here we see that our expected value from Fund C is 450, while our expected value for Fund D was 565. So just on expected value alone, it would appear that Fund D is a better investment, but I want to make sure about my risk measurement on my standard deviation. And so in Fund C, that standard deviation is 456.6, and for Fund D, it was 443. Well, those two standard deviations are fairly close to being the same. And so my risk value between Fund C and Fund D, based on the data that we are analyzing, is basically the same. And that being the case, then it should be a clear choice that Fund D is going to be my preferred investment because that expected value is much greater. 565 is much greater than the 450. So in order to do this analysis using both expected value and standard deviation of these two mutual funds based on the data, the probability data that we were given for both Fund C and Fund D, we used our TI-84 calculator to help us calculate both expected value and standard deviation. And then we've done an analysis. Standard deviations were fairly close to the same. The expected value in Fund D was greater than Fund C. And based on that analysis, we would choose Fund D as our preferred investment. How about that?